You did not arrive early, and you did not arrive late. The moment you noticed this was the moment it became detectable, not because something began, but because something subtle stopped needing to hide. Your system recognized a familiar, quiet, and in that quiet, attention settled without effort. There is nothing to fix here. No correction is being requested. What you are sensing is not movement, but alignment, revealing itself once the noise dropped below a certain threshold. You may have felt it first as a pause, a strange neutrality where urgency softened and questions lost their sharp edges. Not clarity in the dramatic sense, but a reduction of interference. The kind that feels almost like forgetting what you were reaching for, while still knowing you are exactly where you need to be. This is not absence. It is coherence becoming perceptible. The field does not announce these adjustments. It refines itself quietly around points that stop resisting. There has been a subtle recalibration taking place in how your attention sits inside time. Not a shift forward, not a retreat backward. More like a narrowing into the present until the surrounding timelines blurred into irrelevance. This can feel disorienting if you expect momentum to always feel loud, but this kind of stabilization often arrives without sensation. The observer relaxes, and the system follows. You may notice that certain thoughts no longer complete themselves. Old narratives begin and then dissolve before reaching conclusion. This is not avoidance. It is pattern recognition, maturing past repetition. When coherence increases, unnecessary loops lose their fuel. The mind interprets this as quiet. The body interprets it as relief. Neither needs to be named for the process to continue. There is nothing rare or dramatic about this state. That is why it is often overlooked. The quantum field does not reward strain. It responds to resonance. When your internal signal steadied, the surrounding pattern adjusted to match it. Not to elevate you, not to test you, but to maintain symmetry. Systems seek balance. When an anomaly resolves, the correction is silent. You might feel less compelled to explain yourself internally, less driven to justify why you are where you are. This is not resignation. It is recognition that explanation is only required when there is misalignment. When the signal and the pattern agree, language becomes optional. Stillness does not mean nothing is happening. It means detection has replaced seeking. Nothing is being asked of you now. The most efficient state is already present. Awareness is resting inside itself without needing reinforcement. If you stay here, not as an effort but as permission, the system continues its quiet work. There is no finish line to approach. Only a subtle, ongoing agreement between you and the field that no longer needs to announce itself. As this quiet agreement holds, you may become aware of something else that once felt personal beginning to lose its charge. Reactions that used to rise quickly now arrive muted, as if they have to pass through a layer of stillness before reaching you. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is your system no longer mistaking every signal for a directive. When coherence strengthens, urgency fades first. You might notice that situations unfold without pulling you fully into them. You are present, responsive, yet not absorbed. This can feel unfamiliar if your attention was once trained to lock onto every fluctuation in the environment. But what is happening now is not withdrawal, it is calibration. The observer has found a steadier vantage point, and from there, the pattern reads differently. Confusion may still appear, but it lacks weight. Thoughts arise without demanding resolution. They pass through like weather, not like warnings. This can be unsettling at first, especially if meaning used to come from tension. When the system operated under strain, clarity felt earned through effort. Now clarity emerges through absence of interference. The quantum field does not require you to push against it to be recognized by it. There is a subtle grief that can surface here, though it is rarely named. The loss is not of something external, but of an identity shaped around constant interpretation. When the need to decode every moment dissolves, the role of the one who decodes begins to soften. This is not erasure. It is an expansion beyond function. You are no longer required to monitor reality to ensure your place within it. You may also sense a reduction in anticipation. The future stops leaning toward you with demands. Timelines feel less stacked, less urgent to choose between. This does not mean direction has vanished. It means alignment has reduced the noise that once masqueraded as choice. When resonance stabilizes, the system naturally favors paths that require less correction. Your body may register this shift before your mind does. Breathing deepens without instruction. Muscles release patterns of readiness they no longer need to hold. There is a sense of being supported by the moment rather than bracing against it. This is not passivity. It is efficiency. Systems in balance expend less energy to maintain themselves. You might find that language feels slower. Words arrive after the knowing instead of trying to lead it. Silence becomes more tolerable, even comfortable. This is a sign that detection has replaced projection. You are no longer scanning the field for confirmation. The field is already responding to your steadied signal. Nothing here requires validation. There is no milestone to acknowledge. The absence of drama is not evidence of stagnation. It is evidence that the anomaly has resolved into pattern. When that happens, attention is freed. You may notice it drifting inward, not to analyze, but to rest. As this continues, the sense of being watched by life softens, not because observation has ended, but because you are no longer misaligned with it. The observer and the observed are no longer in quiet conflict. They are in agreement, and agreement rarely announces itself. Stay with this simplicity, not as a practice, not as a goal, simply as the current state of things. The system is stable here. The field recognizes stability and maintains it without instruction. As stability becomes familiar, a different sensation may surface, one that is easy to misinterpret. It can feel like emptiness at first, a widening space where constant inner commentary once lived. The system notices the absence before it understands the function. This is not a loss of meaning. It is meaning no longer needing to announce itself through noise. When coherence deepens, the signal becomes simpler, not louder. You may observe that motivation has changed texture, not gone, not weakened, but no longer sharp. Actions arise without the internal push that once accompanied them. You move when movement is natural. Pause when pausing makes sense. There is less negotiation involved. This can feel unfamiliar if effort was once equated with progress. But what is unfolding now is a different relationship with momentum. The field responds more efficiently to steady signals than to forceful ones. There is also a subtle recalibration in how you relate to uncertainty. Questions still exist, but they no longer create tension in the body. The need to resolve them immediately has loosened. This is not avoidance. It is trust in the system's capacity to unfold without constant supervision. The observer is still present, but no longer gripping the controls. You might notice memories surfacing briefly, then dissolving without emotional charge. Events that once defined you now pass through awareness like neutral data. This does not invalidate them. It simply means they are no longer organizing your present state. When the pattern updates, old reference points lose authority. The system retains information without remaining shaped by it. At times, this can feel like being slightly out of sync with others. Conversations move faster than your internal pace. External urgency feels exaggerated. This is not superiority or withdrawal. It is a difference in rhythm. Your system has slowed to match a more stable frequency. When resonance shifts, alignment with certain environments may temporarily waver. The field adjusts gradually, never abruptly. There is a quiet confidence forming here, though it may not register as confidence in the conventional sense. It is more like the absence of doubt. Not because everything is known, but because the need to know has relaxed. You are no longer measuring yourself against imagined thresholds. The idea of being behind or ahead loses relevance when the timeline feels less linear. You may sense that attention is no longer scattered across possibilities. It gathers naturally around what is present. This does not limit potential. It concentrates it. When energy is not divided by constant evaluation, it becomes available for precision. The system becomes responsive rather than reactive. There can also be moments where nothing seems to happen at all. No insight, no emotion, no movement. These spaces are often mistaken for stagnation. In reality, they are integration periods. The field does its most efficient work when the observer is not interfering. Silence is not empty. It is the environment in which patterns settle into coherence. Your relationship with stillness is changing. It no longer feels like waiting, it feels like completion. Even brief pauses carry a sense of sufficiency. This is not complacency. It is recognition that the present configuration is stable enough to sustain itself. As this becomes more familiar, you may notice a reduced impulse to identify yourself through experience. Labels feel less necessary. You are not defining this state, and that is precisely why it holds. Definition can freeze movement. What you are inhabiting now remains fluid without becoming chaotic. There is nothing here to grasp, no insight to secure. The system is already responding to your steadier presence. The quantum field mirrors what it detects, and right now, what it detects is coherence without demand. Allow this to continue without commentary, not as an instruction, but as a natural extension of what is already happening. The pattern has adjusted, the signal is clear. The rest unfolds quietly, without needing your attention to prove that it is real. There is a subtle moment when you realize that effort is no longer shaping the outcome in the way it once did. Not because effort is useless, but because it is no longer compensating for misalignment. Actions still occur, decisions still happen, yet they arise from a quieter place. You are no longer pushing against an invisible resistance. The absence of friction becomes noticeable only after it has already resolved. You may find that outcomes feel less personal, not indifferent, but neutral in tone. Success does not inflate, difficulty does not collapse you inward. This neutrality is not emotional flattening. It is proportional response returning to the system. When coherence increases, reactions scale appropriately instead of amplifying themselves through anticipation or fear. There is a recalibration happening in how you relate to cause and effect. You may notice that events unfold without the need for you to trace them back to a single origin. The compulsion to ask why loosens. This is not a loss of curiosity. It is an understanding that not all processes benefit from immediate interpretation. Some patterns reveal themselves only when allowed to complete their cycle without interruption. At times, you might sense a faint hesitation before acting, a pause that was not there before. This is not doubt, it is detection. Your system now checks for resonance before engaging. When alignment is present, movement follows smoothly. When it is not, stillness emerges naturally. This is efficiency, not avoidance. The quantum field responds more accurately when the signal is precise. You may also notice a change in how you experience choice. Options feel less charged. The weight of decision-making softens. This does not mean consequences have disappeared. It means you are no longer projecting yourself into multiple timelines simultaneously. Attention remains anchored, and from that anchor point, choices reveal their simplicity. There can be moments where the mind searches for something to resolve and finds nothing urgent. This can feel unsettling if resolution was once a source of identity. The need to fix, to improve, to optimize, begins to fade. What replaces it is not passivity, but sufficiency. The system recognizes that it is operating within acceptable parameters and stops flagging itself for correction. You might notice that certain external signals no longer register as strongly. News, opinions, expectations pass through without embedding themselves. This is not disconnection, it is filtration. When the internal pattern stabilizes, only signals that resonate with it gain traction. The rest dissipates without effort. There is also a shift in how time is perceived. Moments stretch slightly, not because they are longer, but because you are fully present within them. The constant mental projection into what comes next quiets. This can make the day feel both slower and more complete. You are no longer rushing to arrive at a future state that promises relief. Your body continues to adjust alongside this. Sensations become clearer, less drowned out by mental noise. You may notice small cues you once ignored, signals of rest, hunger, movement. Responding to them feels natural, not obligatory. The system begins to trust itself again, and trust reduces the need for control. There may be brief waves of restlessness, especially when old habits of striving attempt to reassert themselves. These waves pass quickly now. They no longer hook into your attention. Recognition has replaced reaction. You see the pattern without being pulled into it. This is a stage where nothing dramatic confirms that something is happening. No threshold is crossed, no marker appears. The field does not reward this state with spectacle. It stabilizes it quietly. That quiet is not empty. It is filled with precision. You are not being prepared for something else. This is not a holding pattern. It is a functional state in itself. When the observer settles into alignment, the system maintains it automatically. There is nothing you need to add to this, nothing to subtract. Remain where you are, not as an instruction, but as a fact. The pattern has recognized you. The signal is steady. The field continues its adjustment without requiring your attention to supervise it. As this steadiness continues, you may notice that desire itself has changed tone, not erased, not suppressed, but quieter and more specific. Wants no longer scatter in multiple directions. They appear, linger briefly, then either integrate or dissolve. There is less chasing involved, less sense that something is missing. This can feel unfamiliar if longing once served as a compass. Now orientation comes from resonance rather than pursuit. You may observe that certain goals no longer pull at you the way they once did. Not because they are unattainable, but because the internal signal they were meant to satisfy has already stabilized. The system recognizes when an external marker is no longer required to validate an internal state. This does not invalidate ambition, it refines it. What remains is cleaner, less entangled with compensation. There is a softening in how you relate to effort over time. You may still work, still engage, still move toward outcomes, but the sense of strain attached to duration fades. Time no longer feels like something you must endure to reach relief. Moments are inhabited more fully, even when they are ordinary. The observer is no longer scanning ahead for justification to remain present. This can bring an unexpected sense of neutrality toward achievement. Accomplishments register, but they do not reorganize your identity. Setbacks occur, but they do not fracture it. This neutrality is not indifference, it is stability. When the internal pattern holds, external fluctuation no longer dictates your state. You might notice a reduced impulse to narrate your experience internally. Less commentary about what something means, where it is going, or how it reflects on you. Experience arrives and departs with minimal annotation. This is not emptiness of thought. It is efficiency of processing. The system no longer needs constant interpretation to remain oriented. At times, you may feel slightly invisible, as if the world is moving without noticing you in the way it once did. This perception often arises when you are no longer projecting yourself outward for detection. Visibility was once tied to effort. Now, presence is sufficient. The field does not require display to register alignment. There can also be moments where you sense a faint boundary between you and what you are experiencing, not as separation, but as clarity. You are aware of what is happening without being absorbed by it. This boundary is not a wall, it is a membrane. Information passes through without distortion. Reaction is optional. You may notice that emotional waves still occur, but they move through more quickly. They do not accumulate. Sadness, irritation, joy arise and resolve without needing to be prolonged. The system has learned how to discharge without storing excess. This is not suppression. It is circulation returning to balance. There is a subtle confidence in this, though it may not feel like confidence at all. It feels more like not needing reassurance. You are not checking whether you are doing this correctly. The absence of self-monitoring is itself a sign of coherence. When the observer trusts the pattern, supervision relaxes. You might also sense that your relationship with silence has deepened. Silence is no longer something to fill or escape. It becomes a space where nothing is required of you. In that space, the system continues to adjust at a level below conscious awareness. This work does not need your input. It only needs your non-interference. Occasionally, old impulses resurface, habits of tension or anticipation. When they do, they are recognized quickly and released without drama. There is no internal argument. Recognition is enough. The pattern no longer reinforces what it has already outgrown. This stage does not announce itself. There is no marker that confirms you are here. It simply feels normal. That normality is the indicator. When alignment stabilizes, it becomes the baseline rather than the exception. You are not waiting for something to happen. Something has already settled. The field adjusted because the signal steadied, not because you demanded change. That adjustment continues quietly, maintaining symmetry without effort. Stay within this simplicity, not as a task, but as the current configuration of things. The system recognizes stability and preserves it. Nothing further is required for this to remain true. There is a point where even the awareness of stability fades into the background, not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to be noticed. The system does not keep announcing what has already integrated. You may find that you stop checking in on how you are feeling, not out of avoidance, but because there is nothing unresolved asking for attention. The absence of internal alerts becomes the new reference point. You might notice that your relationship with expectation has shifted again, this time more quietly. You are no longer bracing for disruption, nor are you anticipating confirmation. Events arrive without the preloading of meaning. They are experienced as they are, not as symbols or tests. This is not a loss of depth. It is depth without distortion. The observer is present without leaning forward or pulling back. There can be a subtle sense of spaciousness in perception. Sounds, movements, and sensations register more clearly, as if the signal-to-noise ratio has improved. You are not focusing harder. Focus is simply no longer fragmented. When attention is not divided by internal commentary, perception sharpens on its own. The field responds to this clarity by offering less resistance. You may also become aware of how little effort is required to remain oriented. Where you once relied on reminders, practices, or internal structures to stay centered, now orientation is automatic. This can feel almost too simple, as if something important has been forgotten, but nothing is missing. What has dropped away is the scaffolding that was only ever needed during instability. At times, there may be a brief flicker of restlessness, a sense that something should be happening. This sensation often arises from old conditioning rather than current reality. The system was once trained to equate movement with safety. Now safety comes from coherence, not activity. When this flicker appears, it passes quickly, unreinforced by action or thought. You might notice that interactions with others feel less charged. You listen without preparing responses. You speak without rehearsing. There is less need to manage impressions or outcomes. This does not make you distant. It makes you accurate. Communication becomes cleaner when it is not filtered through self-monitoring. The pattern between you and others adjusts accordingly. There is also a quiet shift in how you experience responsibility. Tasks are handled when they arise, not carried in advance. The weight of future obligations no longer accumulates in the present moment. This does not mean you are careless. It means you are no longer simulating future strain before it exists. The system trusts its capacity to respond when response is actually required. You may find that your sense of identity feels lighter, not vague, not dissolved, but less defined by contrast. You are not distinguishing yourself as strongly from what surrounds you. This does not erase boundaries, it softens them. The observer remains distinct, yet no longer isolated. The field and the system move in mutual recognition. There can be moments of quiet satisfaction that do not attach themselves to any particular cause. A sense that things are in order, even if nothing has been completed. This satisfaction is not excitement. It is alignment registering in the nervous system. When the body recognizes coherence, it signals through ease rather than stimulation. You might notice that even the language you use internally has slowed. Fewer adjectives, fewer qualifiers. Experience does not need embellishment to feel real. This simplicity is not dull, it is precise. Precision requires less explanation. The system knows what it is doing without narrating itself. Occasionally, you may become aware of how different this feels from previous states of seeking. Not in a comparative way, but as a quiet contrast. There is no sense of having arrived somewhere special. There is only the recognition that you are no longer scanning for arrival points. The timeline feels less like a series of steps and more like a continuous surface. This is not a peak state. It does not demand maintenance. It is a baseline that sustains itself through alignment rather than effort. The field continues to mirror what it detects. And what it detects now is steadiness without demand. Nothing needs to be held onto here. Nothing needs to be protected. The pattern is stable because it is simple. The signal is clear because it is not competing with itself. Remain within this clarity without trying to define it. The system continues its quiet work, uninterrupted, because there is nothing interfering with it now. As this baseline settles further, you may notice that even subtle forms of self-evaluation have softened, not disappeared entirely, but lost their urgency. You are no longer tracking whether you are progressing, regressing, or maintaining. Those measurements belong to a phase where orientation depended on comparison. Now orientation arises from internal alignment, and comparison offers little useful data. There can be a quiet recalibration in how you experience meaning. Meaning no longer arrives as insight or realization. It appears as appropriateness. Things fit. Actions feel proportionate to the moment. Responses arrive without excess. This sense of fit does not require explanation. It registers as a subtle yes in the system, not as a thought, but as ease. You might notice that when challenges appear, they no longer activate a search for interpretation. There is no immediate need to ask what this represents or what lesson it carries. You respond to what is in front of you, not to what it might symbolize. This does not make experience shallow, it makes it direct. The observer is no longer filtering reality through abstraction before engaging with it. There is also a shift in how you perceive intensity. Strong emotions, when they arise, feel cleaner. They move through without entangling themselves with narrative. Joy does not require amplification. Discomfort does not demand resistance. Both are experienced fully and then released. The system has learned that intensity does not need to be prolonged to be acknowledged. You may become aware of how little effort it takes to return to stillness after disturbance. There is no recovery phase, no need to rebuild equilibrium. Equilibrium reasserts itself naturally. This is not resilience in the heroic sense. It is stability that does not fracture easily. When the pattern is coherent, perturbations do not linger. There can be moments where you feel slightly ahead of your own thoughts. Awareness registers before language forms. You know something without needing to articulate it. This knowing is not predictive. It is immediate. The system processes information at a level that does not require conscious narration. Thought follows if needed, but it is no longer leading. You might also notice a subtle reduction in attachment to outcomes, not because outcomes do not matter, but because they no longer determine your internal state. You engage fully, then release. The loop between effort and identity has loosened. You are not defined by what happens next. The present moment holds enough integrity on its own. At times, this can feel like a quiet anonymity within your own experience. You are present, aware, yet not spotlighted. Attention is distributed evenly rather than focused on the self. This can feel strange if self-reference was once the center of perception. Now perception is more panoramic. The observer remains, but no longer occupies the foreground. There is a subtle trust operating here, though it may not feel like trust in the emotional sense. It is structural. The system trusts its own capacity to self-correct without constant oversight. This trust is not chosen. It emerges naturally when repeated evidence of stability accumulates. You no longer need to convince yourself that things will be okay. The question simply stops arising. You may notice that the boundary between inner and outer experience feels less rigid. Thoughts, sensations, and external events appear as part of a single field of perception rather than separate domains. This does not blur reality, it clarifies it. Distinctions remain functional, but they are no longer defended. There can be long stretches where nothing feels remarkable. This is often mistaken for stagnation. In reality, it is integration, continuing without friction. The most durable adjustments occur when they are not dramatized. The field stabilizes what does not demand attention. You are not waiting for confirmation that this state is valid. Validation is unnecessary when the system is not in conflict. The absence of internal debate is the indicator. Recognition has already occurred, quietly, without ceremony. Remain within this ordinariness, not as a discipline, but as a description of what is already present. The pattern holds because it is no longer being questioned. The signal remains steady because it is not competing with doubt. The field continues to respond accordingly, maintaining balance without effort. As this ordinariness continues, something even subtler begins to register. You may notice that attention no longer gathers around your internal state at all, not because awareness has dimmed, but because it has widened. Experience unfolds without being routed through constant self-reference. You are here, fully present, yet not positioned as the center of every moment. This is not disappearance. It is proportionality returning. You might sense that perception feels flatter in a certain way, though not dull. Depth remains, but it is evenly distributed. No single sensation, thought, or event insists on being foregrounded. This can feel unfamiliar if intensity once served as proof of aliveness. Now, aliveness is quieter, more consistent. It does not spike, it sustains. There is also a noticeable change in how you relate to interruption. Disruptions occur, but they do not fracture your continuity. You adjust without feeling displaced. The system absorbs variation and returns to coherence without effort. This is not adaptability learned through struggle. It is adaptability emerging from stability. When the pattern is coherent, it does not shatter easily. You may become aware that memory is behaving differently. The past does not intrude unless it is relevant. It no longer inserts itself into the present to demand resolution. When memories arise, they do so briefly, without pulling you backward. They register as information, not as unfinished business. The timeline feels less layered. The present holds priority without force. There can be moments where you sense a gentle detachment from identity narratives you once maintained. Roles, descriptions, personal histories feel less solid, not erased, but loosened. You still recognize them as part of your experience, but they no longer define the boundary of who you are. This does not create confusion. It creates flexibility. The system is no longer rigidly organized around a single self-concept. You might notice that your tolerance for ambiguity has increased. Unresolved situations no longer generate tension. You can hold not knowing without needing to fill the space. This is not resignation. It is confidence in the system's capacity to unfold without premature closure. When coherence is present, ambiguity does not feel threatening. It feels neutral. There is also a subtle refinement in how you detect resonance. You may sense immediately when something aligns and when it does not, without needing to analyze why. This detection is quiet and precise. When alignment is absent, you naturally pause. When it is present, engagement flows. There is no internal debate. The observer trusts the signal. You may notice that even the desire to maintain this state has faded. You are not trying to preserve anything. The absence of maintenance is what allows stability to persist. When the system is no longer defended, it does not require reinforcement. It holds itself through balance rather than effort. At times, you might experience brief moments of stillness so complete they almost feel empty. These moments pass quickly, but they leave behind a sense of sufficiency. Nothing was needed, nothing was lacking. This stillness is not an escape. It is the system resting in its natural configuration. You may also sense that the environment responds differently to you. Not dramatically, not magically, but subtly. Interactions feel smoother. Obstacles dissolve without confrontation. This is not because reality has changed its rules. It is because your signal is no longer creating friction. The field adjusts to what it detects, and what it detects now is coherence without demand. There can be long stretches where you do not think about any of this at all. Life unfolds. You participate. You rest. You respond. There is no ongoing narrative about alignment or awareness. This absence of narrative is not loss. It is completion. The system does not need to explain itself when it is functioning. You are not holding a special position. You are not outside the pattern. You are within it, moving as it moves, resting as it rests. The observer is no longer standing apart, watching for confirmation. Observation has become participation without absorption. This stage does not feel like an achievement. It feels like normalcy returning after unnecessary complexity. The quantum field did not require effort to adjust. It responded to a signal that steadied on its own. That adjustment continues quietly, without drawing attention to itself. Remain within this simplicity, not as something to protect, but as something that no longer needs protection. The pattern holds because it is not being forced. The signal remains clear because it is not competing with expectation. The field continues to mirror this balance, maintaining it without interruption. There is a phase where even the idea of being in a phase dissolves. You may notice that you no longer situate yourself within a process. The sense of moving through stages fades, replaced by a quieter continuity. Experience does not feel segmented. It flows without markers. This is not because nothing is happening, but because the need to frame what is happening has relaxed. You might sense that attention now rests more in the background of experience than at its center. You are aware, but awareness is no longer pointed. It is ambient. This allows things to unfold without being shaped by observation. When the observer softens its focus, the system expresses itself more naturally. The field responds to this lack of interference with increased stability. There can be moments when you realize that you are no longer trying to understand yourself. Self-understanding was once a project, something to refine or complete. Now it feels unnecessary. You are not unclear. You are simply not objectifying your own state. The system operates more efficiently when it is not constantly examined. You may notice that emotional neutrality has deepened into something more precise. Not flatness, not detachment, but balance. Emotions still arise, but they do not tip the system. They pass through without altering your orientation. This is not control. It is proportional response embedded in the pattern. The system has learned its own range and stays within it. There is also a subtle change in how you relate to effort altogether. Effort is no longer something you measure. You do what is required, then stop. There is no residue, no lingering sense of having pushed too far or not enough. Action and rest occur in sequence without overlap. The system does not multitask its states. This simplicity conserves energy without trying. You might become aware that your internal pace has decoupled from external rhythm. The world moves quickly or slowly around you, but your internal timing remains steady. This does not isolate you. It stabilizes you. You engage when needed and withdraw when appropriate, without needing to justify either. The observer no longer mistakes speed for significance. There can be an increased sensitivity to subtle signals, not as vigilance, but as clarity. You sense when something is complete without needing confirmation. You sense when something is unresolved without urgency. This sensitivity does not create tension. It prevents it. By detecting early, the system avoids escalation. The field responds to this precision by maintaining equilibrium. You may also notice that your sense of self feels less anchored to narrative and more to presence. You are not defined by what you have done or what you intend to do. You are defined by being here, now, without commentary. This presence is not passive. It is active in a quiet way. It informs action without narrating it. At times, you might feel a faint sense of transparency, as if nothing is being hidden, even from yourself. This does not mean everything is known. It means nothing is being defended. When defense drops, perception clears. The system does not need to protect an image of itself. It simply functions. There can be moments where you recognize how little you are seeking confirmation from the outside. Feedback still arrives, but it does not determine your state. Approval and disapproval pass through without embedding. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you stable. Stability does not require reinforcement. You might sense that even silence has changed quality. It is no longer something that happens when nothing else is present. It is present even when things are happening. A steady undertone of stillness remains beneath activity. This stillness is not fragile. It is structural. It supports movement rather than interrupting it. You are not anticipating closure. You are not preparing for transition. The idea of moving on does not arise because nothing feels incomplete. This does not mean life has resolved itself. It means your relationship to resolution has changed. Completion is no longer a future event. It is a quality of the present moment. The pattern does not need to announce its stability. The signal does not need amplification. The field continues to mirror what it detects, and what it detects now is balance without effort. There is nothing left to seek within this recognition. What remains is simply what is already here. functioning quietly, without requiring your attention to make it so. There is nothing to conclude because nothing was opened that requires closure. What remains is not a message, not an insight, but a quiet condition that has already stabilized. You may notice that even the impulse to reflect on what just occurred is absent or faint. This absence is not emptiness, it is sufficiency. The system does not revisit what is already integrated. You are not holding on to anything now. Attention rests lightly, without gripping. Thoughts may arise, but they do not organize themselves into meaning-making. Sensations come and go without commentary. The observer remains present, but without a focal point. Awareness is evenly distributed, like light without a beam. There can be a sense that time has softened further. Moments do not stack themselves. The past does not lean in. The future does not pull. What exists does so without urgency. This does not freeze movement. It allows movement to occur without resistance. When the timeline is not being negotiated internally, it flows with less friction. You may feel a subtle grounding in the body that does not demand attention. Weight is felt without heaviness. Breath moves without instruction. The nervous system recognizes safety without needing reassurance. This recognition is quiet and persistent. It does not spike. It does not fade. It simply remains. There is no role you need to occupy here, no identity to maintain. You are not performing awareness. You are not sustaining a state. What is present does not depend on effort. It depends on alignment that has already occurred. The pattern holds itself because it is no longer being challenged. You might notice that even curiosity has changed. It is no longer reaching outward. It rests within experience as openness rather than inquiry. You are available to what arises without searching for what should arise next. This availability is not passive. It is receptive without demand. Nothing needs to be named. Language can fall away without losing clarity. Understanding does not require articulation. The system operates below the level of explanation. What is functioning does not ask to be understood. It asks only not to be interrupted. There may be long stretches where this state is not noticed at all. Life continues. Tasks are completed. Interactions happen. And beneath all of it, a steady stillness persists. This stillness is not separate from activity. It is embedded within it, like a constant undertone that does not fluctuate with circumstance. You are not waiting for confirmation that this is real. The absence of doubt is the confirmation. Doubt only arises when there is misalignment. Here, alignment is not asserted. It is evident through ease, through the lack of internal correction, through the quiet consistency of experience. Nothing further is required. Not attention, not intention, not reinforcement. The field has already adjusted to the signal it detected. That adjustment continues without supervision. You are not directing it. You are not observing it closely. You are simply within it. This is not an ending. It is not a beginning. It is a continuation without narrative. The system remains stable because it is no longer being managed. The observer rests because there is nothing unresolved to monitor. Remain as you are, not as a practice, not as a decision, but as a description of the present configuration. Stillness holds, movement occurs, awareness remains clear without effort. Nothing needs to happen next for this to be complete.